Hey there, this is our last lesson for Chapter 7 for this year. So this is factoring ax squared plus bx plus c. This is going to be very similar to our last lesson, other than the fact this time we're going to have a values in here. So we have to watch out and do some different things as we're working through here. With this one, again we want to spot the error that was solved when factoring this one. Once you've spotted this error, make sure you put it onto our Canvas page as well as in your notebook. The goal for today is just to figure out how do we factor these, and we factor these by using some new methods. You'll see what those methods look like in just a second. Again, when you're factoring ax squared plus bx plus c problems, we've already done some where a was equal to 1, but sometimes you're not going to have a equal to 1. So the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out, look for some greatest common factors of the terms, and then factor further if you can. We'll see what this looks like in the actual practice problems coming up. So with our first one here, we look at this, we see 5x squared plus 15x plus 10. There's not an x in all three, so we cannot divide out an x. Remember, a greatest common factor means something you can take out of everything, but they are all divisible by 5. So if we first take a 5 out of this, we could say this now becomes 5 times x squared plus 3x plus 2. And now at this point, we have x squared plus 3x plus 2. This again is in the form of having our x squared is by itself. So at this point we could say, hey, do we know anything that has two things that multiply to 2 and add to 3? So let's think about the factor pairs of 2. Well, we have 1 and 2, which means when you multiply these things together, you get 2, but when you add them, you get 3. So this could break down into 5 times x plus 2 times x plus 1. And therefore, if we were to solve these, we would get x-intercepts at -2 and at -1. This problem is not asking us to solve it, but that would be the next step, is where we're going. Now, other times we're not going to have the ability to do that quite as easily. And you'll notice if you look at these types of problems, you might look at this and say, well, I don't really know what could factor through here, and there's nothing that you could take out. You see that's true in both these cases. So we're going to look at something here in just a second to help us out. Alright, this next idea I'm going to give you is we're going to give you guys a little tool that you can make use of. So one tool you can make use of is the idea that a times c, there are two things that you multiply there, would then also add to our b value. So when we think about this, we're saying a times c on the top, and our b value here, whatever we multiply to get to a times c adds to b, and that is how we can help ourselves break this apart. Again, you could list out those different values, or you could just try some things. So at this point, a times c. So let's look for our first one. I'm going to make my symbol. So a times 3 is 4 times 3, which is 12. And then I have 13 goes on the bottom. I'm not worried about x's at the moment. So I need two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 13. Now thankfully that one is pretty easy to solve because it's just 12 and 1. So in this case, we would now have the ability to break this into a different polynomial. So watch what we break this into now. I moved it up over here so I'd have a little more workspace here. What we're going to break this into next is we're going to break this into 4x squared plus 12x plus x plus 3. So at this point, we have taken this 13x and we have split it into 12 and 1 because 12 and 1 multiply to 12, which was our a times c value. And they add to 13. So we've taken that, we've split that in here. At this point, now we can factor by grouping, something we worked on before. And then we can use this to help us factor out all the way through. Again, a reason why we like factor by grouping is because it can work with all sorts of problems. It's not just this one special case scenario. So now when we factor this first one out, we get 4 can be taken out of both, and an x can be taken out of both. So you get 4x times x plus 3. For our last one, we just have the value x plus 3 here. This did not get changed. But technically, we're multiplying a 1 in front of it. So we see that we have, this is really a plus 1 here, because like all things in math, if we don't write it, there's going to be a plus 1 right next to it. So we can rewrite this in the final format of 4x plus 1 times x plus 3. Now, again, we are near the end of our year. This is some complex math stuff we haven't seen all the way. So listen as I walk back through what we just did. We had a trinomial. We were not able to factor this nicely because nothing multiplies to 3, adds to 13, and then you also have to think about what two things multiply to 4. So we want to do factoring by grouping, but to do that we actually had to split our middle value, our b. To do that we use a tool, we use this little x, and then we said, alright, the a times c get multiplied together on top, the b value is on the bottom. These two things on the sides need to multiply to the a times c value but add to the b value. So here, 4 times 3 was 12, 13 goes on the bottom because that's our b value. Two things that multiply to 12 but add to 13 were 1 and 12. Therefore we took this 13x and split it into 12x and 1x. And then from there we did factoring by grouping, and thankfully we were able to find out that we could factor some of these things down and through. Let's do that again for our next one. So for our next one we're going to do a times c, which is 3 times 2 is going to give us 6 on the top. But then our b value is negative 7. So we need two numbers that multiply to 6 and add to negative 7. Well, this should be, again, pretty straightforward. This would be negative 6 and negative 1. Because negative 6 times negative 1 equals positive 6. Negative 6 plus negative 1 equals negative 7. So we're going to take this value of negative 7x and change it into negative 6x and negative 1x. So we'd be left with this. Again, at this point, we would be able to factor our first two pieces and factor our last two pieces. So for our first two pieces, we would have dividing it out by a 3x, which would leave us with an x minus 2. And for our last two, you'll notice this time we have an x plus 2 in there, but because there's a negative 1, I'm going to multiply that negative 1 through, so we're going to get this one to be plus x minus 2. Again, going back through how I did that one, just to make that clear, I don't want to skip steps for you. So you want to write it like this. We do have the minus 1 and the x plus 2 there. So we would have the negative 1 is pulled out, and then this would be the x plus 2. And this again becomes a minus 2. Because there's a negative 1 in front of here, I'm dividing out this negative 1 first, knowing that negative 1 times negative 2 becomes 2, negative 1 times x becomes negative 1x. At this point we see we have x minus 2 in both of these. We also have a 3x minus 1. So our final factored form of this would become 3x minus 1 times x minus 2. The good news is that method can be used no matter if AC is negative or no matter what happens. So again, we'll look through this, we'll see how this one works out. Again, we're using our little x tool. AC gets multiplied on top, B gets multiplied on bottom, and this is what it will look like. Negative 7 times 2 would be negative 14, and then negative 5 on the bottom. Well, two things that multiply to negative 14 but add to negative 5 would be negative 7 and positive 2. In this case, I'm actually going to rewrite it with the 2 up front because I noticed that there's a 2 here and there's a 2 here and there's a 7 here and a 7 here. It's going to help me rewrite this a little bit better. So I can rewrite this as 2x squared plus 2x minus 7x minus 7. Which again, if we're looking at these values, we should easily be able to see what factors out then. So with our first one, we can factor out a 2x. So we'd have 2x times x plus 1. And then here we could factor out a negative 7 out of both of these. So we'd be able to take out a negative 7 and we'd be left with x plus 1 here. This would simplify down to 2x minus 7 times x plus 1. Again, what I like about this method is no matter which form it is, if a is negative, if c is negative, if a times c is negative, no matter what happens, we can still use our factoring by grouping tool by using that x to help guide us through this. Again, a times c goes on top, b goes on bottom. So as we look at this one, a times c is negative 4 times 5, which would be negative 20. And then b is negative 8. So I need two things that multiply to 20, add to negative 8. Sorry, multiply to negative 20, add to negative 8. Well, I can think my factor pairs for 20 are 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 5 and 4. Well, 1 and 20 can't make 8, 5 and 4 can't make 8, but 10 and 2 can make 8. You can make 10 and 2 make 8 by doing negative 10 and positive 2. Again, I'm going to look at these values before I put them in here. I'm changing my negative 8 for a negative 10x and a positive 2x. And I know that 10 and 5 can work together. I know that 2 and 4 can work together. So I'm actually going to rewrite it again like this. Negative 4x squared plus 2x minus 10x plus 5. At this point, I can factor the first two and I can factor the last two by doing our factoring by grouping. So with our first two, I see that a 2 multiplies in both as well as an x, so I can factor out a 2x, and that's going to leave me with, and you know what, because that was a negative 4, I'm actually going to factor out a negative 2 first. So I'll be left with 2x minus 1. And then for my last two, negative 10x and positive 5. I know 5 goes into both, but because that 10 was a negative, I'm going to factor out that negative 5. I'm going to be left with 2x minus 1. Again, we see that our factor pair here has the exact same thing for both. So then we just take these and we rewrite it like the following. Negative 2x minus 5 times the quantity 2x minus 1. Again, there is a homework assignment. It is kind of big again. It builds off what we did last time. Make sure you're taking time and working through all of the problems. If you need any help, let me know.